What was your first sailboat? If you're anything like me and pretty much every other sailor out there, most of us anyway, there's a good chance it wasn't a 50-foot ocean crosser or even a 30-something foot island hopper. It's far more likely that you started with something small and you bought what was not only in your budget but was also best suited to help you learn. This week on Everything You Need to Know, we're looking at, and these are my thoughts, not yours, the top 5 22-footers. The criteria for such a boat matters a lot because the 22-foot area is filled with a lot of different boats for different purposes. Right off the go, I'm going to say it's going to be your first boat, so it needs to be cheap. You may have lots of money, but you don't want your first start into a new hobby to have a big initial investment just in case you don't end up liking it. Next, it should serve more than one purpose, and that might sound silly when we're talking about a boat, but consider that some of these 22s are open hull race boats with no cabin, no head, nowhere to get out of the weather. I'd like my 22 to have some sort of cabin and hopefully a head. Now you might start thinking about your favorite 22-footers and realize what I realized. Most of them, the names start with a C. I definitely clued into that, but a few of them don't, and we'll cover those. My first boat happened to be a 22-footer, and it did start with a C. It was a Chrysler 22. I know, right? Chrysler made sailboats? They can barely make cars. I'm just kidding, Mopar guys. I love you, and I do love my Dodges. Back in the 70s, though, Chrysler purchased a company that was already making boats and making boat engines, inboards and outboards. So for a while, it was possible for you to go out and buy a boat with an engine that both have the Chrysler nameplate on the side, which is weird. The Chrysler 22 did not make my top 5 list, but I wanted to mention it because it is still a fantastic boat for a first-time sailor. I recommend it to people and actually know somebody that just bought one based on my recommendation. It taught me more than I've learned on any other boat I've ever been on. The problem is they only made them in the mid-70s, so finding one that's in good shape now is really hard. Chrysler 22s sell up around here for about $1,000 with a trailer, and they sell every year and change hands all the time. But there are better boats out there, so let's get started with our list and start at number 5. The Cape Dory 22, or the Alberg 22, or the Typhoon Senior, or whatever the one you find is called. And you guys had to know there would be a Carl Alberg boat on this list, right? Carl Alberg had a strong reputation for designing some of the strongest, most seaworthy vessels in the world, and the 22 fits right into that. This is my only top 5 boat with a full keel. But if you're going into some big seas and occasional fairly large storms, this is the one that you want to buy. If I lived in the Florida Keys or somewhere on the East Coast, this is the boat for me. It has that full keel but shallow draft, so I can get in and out of all the tight spots. It has a keel-hung rudder, so when you're going up the ICW, you don't really have to worry about running over some logs and snapping the rudder off. And a solid glass hull of who knows how thick it really is. It makes putting a hole or damaging the boat really difficult. These are heavy little guys too, coming in over 3,000 pounds, much heavier than anything else on this list. And cheap, less than 10 grand for sure, and they do hold their value. You won't be finding one for $1,000 unless it needs a complete refit. Next up is number 4, and it is the Cal 22. Now, this is a lesser known boat, but it is kind of all things to all people in the 22-foot boat market without being amazing at any one of those things. But it just really gives you what you're looking for if you want to learn how to sail without breaking the bank. The Cal 22 came with a sloop rig, a cabin that has a head in it, and you can get a trailer, and you can trailer at home at the end of the day. You also get a V-berth where you could sleep 2 people if you wanted to, a drop-down dinette, and you could have the kids sleep there, and of course a settee on the other side to have someone else sleep. And you also got a 2-burner stove, which is pretty good for a 22. This boat would teach you a lot, and it's well built, and it's modern enough that you should be able to find a good one with a trailer in somewhere around the $5,000 neighborhood. And it's only just a hair over 2,000 pounds, so you could tow it with literally anything, even your Chrysler. Just kidding, Mopar guys, I love you. If you want the best of all worlds 22-footer, a very usable, trailerable boat that's cheap and reliable with a cabin, there really is only one reason you wouldn't buy a Cal 22. And that's because you might be able to find the next boat on the list. Number 3 on the list, the lesser-known Capri 22. They do all start with C, don't they? What's the deal with that? The Capri was made by Catalina Yachts, and it's a lot like every other 22 out there, except this 22 is fast. A hull speed of 6 knots and a PHRF of 201. This thing is going to be a little rocket in the 22-foot fleet. You get the V-berth that you'd expect, you get 2 benches, but really not much else. You do get a porta potty, and that's it. With the Capri, you also lose a lot of the headroom that you might expect in a 22-footer, but I'm not sure we're buying a 22 for headroom. I think we're buying it because it's fun and it's going to teach us to sail. And what better way than to learn to race? And we always say an hour of racing will teach you way more than an entire weekend of sailing. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make this whole channel possible. Big shout out to Going Coastal, this week's newest patron. Welcome and thank you. Also, a side note, I'm going on a little trip. Before we get back to the 22-footers, I wanted to tell you about this. If anyone wants to grab a cold one or hang out, I'm going to be somewhere around the Carolinas for a short while, and then I'm on to the Bahamas, and I'm headed for the Exumas and Georgetown. So if you're going to be in Georgetown, February, March kind of timing, shoot me a message, let me know, and I will see you back down south. Moving on, the number 2 boat on this list, and I'm betting this is the one everyone's been waiting for because it's basically the reigning champion of 22-foot boats. You can't have this list without this boat. The best-selling, the most popular, the Catalina 22. This boat is nothing short of legendary. This boat was designed by Frank Butler in 1969, and while it is an extremely popular boat in the US, it was also built in Canada and Australia and the UK. And these things came with options. You could get a fin keel, you can get a wing keel, you could get a swinging keel arrangement to get into all those shallow spots. You could get a head, you can get the spinnaker package, even a pop-up top in the cabin to make it more roomy. My dad's boat had this pop-top thing, he had a Clipper 26. And let me tell you, it makes a huge difference inside. You can even make bug netting around it, so you can leave the pop-top up all night. This Mark I Catalina 22 was just shy of 2,500 pounds. Typical sloop rig, tiller, outboard. They ran this model from 1969 with some changes along the way, all the way to 1995. That's how successful this thing was. And in 95, they didn't stop. They released the Mark II. The only real downside to the Mark I was speed. Compared to the Capri we just talked about, there just wasn't any contest. It's not a super fast boat. When the Mark II came out in 95, the biggest deal about it was how much easier they made it to trailer it. Swing keel and all that kind of stuff. I get asked a lot, what is the best option for a small trailer sailor? And we will do an episode on that down the road. The plan is there. But trust me, a Mark II Catalina 22 will be on that list. Now I stand behind this boat and I stand behind this statement. You really can't get a better all-around, useful, cheap, easy-to-own, well-mannered, trailerable 22-foot sailboat than this thing. You really can't. This is the boat that will keep you safe and really teach you everything you want to learn about sailing and more. There is a problem though. You guys know me, and you know my priority is not usually what's the best all-arounder when it comes to boats. If it was, this list would just stop right here. We'd call it the Catalina 22 that any sane person would buy and just move on with life. But I'm not normal, and some of us need to go fast. At the cost of comfort and practicality, we sacrifice so we can go racing every Thursday night or regattas on the weekend. So if you're looking for a boat you can sleep on and carry a porta potty and have enough space to get out of the weather down below, but you also want to spank all the big guys on the race course, you have to pay some attention to J-boats. J-boats have long been the staple on the race scene, and for good reason. The designer Rob Johnstone knew what he was doing when he penned this thing. The number one 22-footer on my list for the top 5 is the J22. They started cranking out J22s in the mid-'80s, and the production ran from one factory or another all the way till 2017. That's how good these things were. The J22 is what they call a glass-over Baltex core, which is fancy balsa. But because it wants to be a race car, it has a fractional rig instead of a masthead. It has a fin keel and a transom-hung rudder out back. All this go-fastness adds up to about 1,800 pounds, and it comes with a trailer. The J22 also gets the adjustable backstay and upper and lower shrouds so that you can manipulate the mast a lot more, which is not something you're going to find on very many 22s. Because it's a racer, the cockpit is 7 feet long, which is massive for this kind of boat, so you won't be at a lack of room to have your friends come up with you. Also, while most 22s manage a PHRF rating in the mid-200s to high 200s on a good day, this one comes in at 180, so she's fast, bloody fast. By the mid-90s, the J22 was racing in more than 60 different fleets worldwide, and to become internationally recognized. It's fleet raced all over the world now, still to today. And while they do have offshore-rated hatches and equipment, these are pretty much the king of the lake racers, and that's at their core what they are. Canadian Yachting said the J22 is a fun, sprightly yacht packed with performance, and that basically sums it up. Would I race it? Absolutely, every day, anywhere that there's a race. I'll trailer it for 300 miles to go to a race with this thing, and that's the beauty of its lightness and its portability. Would I weekend on it? Yeah, sure. If it were just me or me and my lady friend, no problem. Would I try to get the kids to sleep on it? No, it just isn't big enough. So, if that's in the cards, go back to the Catalina. Now, you guys might think I'm crazy because I would rather have the race version of the 22-foot boat. So I will put with that caveat, for most people, the Catalina 22 or any of the other boats we mentioned, and there's a whole bunch of other 22s that would certainly meet your needs. I would say if you're trying to buy a 22, you're probably new to sailing, you're probably buying your first boat, buy a cheap one. Even if it's not in great shape, as long as it's serviceable and it's not going to sink and it comes with sails, if you can pick one up for $1,000 all day long, do it. And use it for a year. That's what we usually do around here. Chrysler 22s, we've got, I think, 6 of them floating around. They change hands every year. I think all 6 of them change hands every year. $1,000 every time. These are probably $100,000 boats at this point, given that price tag and how many times they've been swapped around. But you can get it cheap. You use it for a year as long as it's safe and you got a VHF and a life jacket. Go use it, have a good time, and sell it at the end of the year. That's it, guys. Do you think I missed one? You want to hear me talk about your boat on everything you need to know, or do you have another idea for an episode? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys next week.